Oh. One of the most quintessential American brands, Harley Davidson, has announced that it's moving more of its production overseas in order to avoid EU tariffs on its products. Now, those tariffs came in response to US tariffs imposed on EU steel and aluminium. President Trump has accused the motorcycle company of waving the white flag and surrendering, and has now even suggested imposing taxes on the firm. The US now not only seems to be waging an international trade war, but it's also battling its own companies as well. We'll break down the implications of all this with a guest here in the studio later. But first, we head over to our news centre to update you on the latest stories at this hour with Devin waiting. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. Top U.S. diplomats have come to the region to discuss numerous issues, including North Korea. Secretary of Defense James Mattis is now in China for the first leg of a three-nation Asia tour, which will also bring him to South Korea and Japan. In remarks to reporters before he left the U.S., Mattis noted that North Korea still has serious missile capabilities. National Security Advisor John Bolton, meanwhile, is heading to Moscow to iron out the details of a possible summit between President Trump and President Putin. Lee Ji-won has this report.
U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis said North Korea's ballistic missile capabilities still exist today, but that the U.S. hopes the issue can be solved through diplomacy. At a press conference in Alaska on Tuesday, before heading to meet his counterparts in South Korea, China, and Japan, Mattis told reporters that the U.S. takes Pyongyang's capabilities very seriously. But he added that for now, there is full support for the diplomats who are trying to solve the issue, namely U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and National Security Advisor John Bolton, and that the U.S. will see progress in the days and weeks ahead. When asked if he is confident that the U.S. missile defense systems would work if needed, Mattis assured that he is absolutely confident. And answering a question on whether there will still be a need to continue to expand the missile defense base Fort Greely in Alaska if the current talks with North Korea bear fruit, Mattis said that even if one threat goes away, the U.S. must stay alert to other potential threats. Mattis arrived in China on Tuesday, becoming the first defense secretary to visit Beijing since 2014. During his three-day stay, he will focus on improving security dialogue with Beijing. Mattis will then travel to Seoul on Thursday for talks with South Korean Defense Minister Song Young-moo before heading to Japan. Meanwhile, Security Advisor John Bolton is expected in Moscow on Wednesday for talks with his Russian counterpart and possibly with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Kremlin said on Tuesday the two diplomats will talk about international security and stability, disarmament, regional problems, and bilateral ties. This is seen as an effort to pave the way for a possible summit between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russia's President Putin. Bolton is due to give a news conference Wednesday afternoon on the outcome of his visit and possibly on the details of the possible U.S.-Russia summit. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told CNN on Monday that the U.S. won't be putting a timeline on North Korea's denuclearization, but instead will regularly evaluate the regime's sincerity about following through on its pledges. And on Wednesday, according to broadcaster VOA, a State Department official stressed that no timeline doesn't mean U.S. policy on Pyongyang has changed. The goal is still the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. VOA did not name the official, but they reportedly said international sanctions are still in full effect, and the U.S. is working closely with China on engaging with the regime. The report also said Secretary Pompeo will lead follow-up negotiations at the earliest possible date to implement the results of the North Korea-U.S. summit. Now, the United States has not had an ambassador in South Korea for a year and a half, but that looks like it's about to change. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee has approved President Trump's nominee for the post, the recently retired Admiral Harry Harris. He'll now need a full Senate vote, likely in the next week or so, to be confirmed. Kim Yo-sun reports.
The U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Tuesday unanimously approved President Trump's pick for ambassador to South Korea. Harry Harris, the former chief of the U.S. Pacific Command, now awaits a full Senate vote expected for early July. Shortly after, he should fill the post that has remained vacant since the Trump administration took office 18 months ago. Harris, who is considered a hawk on foreign policy issues, had earlier supported the idea of pausing joint military drills between Washington and Seoul at his confirmation hearing earlier this month.
I think the whole landscape has shifted, and I believe that we should give major exercises, a pause to see if Kim Jong-un, in fact, is serious about his part of the negotiations.
Stressing the importance of continuing negotiations with North Korea, Harris also highlighted the need to create breathing space.
I think that we do need to create some breathing space for the negotiations to continue and to assess whether Kim Jong-un is serious on his part of the deal or not, and I think this gives us that opportunity.
If confirmed by the Senate, Harris will serve as Washington's top envoy to Seoul at a time when the allies are coordinating closely on a range of issues, mainly the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. Kim Hye-sun, Arirang News.
South Korea sent a team of inspectors today to North Korea's Mount Kumgang to check out the facilities that will be used for a planned reunion in August of families separated by the Korean War. These inspections were agreed upon last Friday at the Inter-Korean Red Cross talks. The team of 20 people will be in the north for 3 days, led by Kim Byung-dae, who heads the Humanitarian Cooperation Bureau at Seoul's Unification Ministry. It'll include staff from the South Korean Red Cross and technicians. They'll be checking the meeting rooms, hotels, rest areas, and electricity supplies. And after the inspection, South Korea will start renovating the facilities in July or August. Officials from the two Koreas have also agreed to start joint inspections of the railroads that cross the inter-Korean border as work continues to build transport links between South and North. Of particular concern will be North Korea's railroads, which will need a lot of work to modernize them. Plus, there are the international sanctions on the North that could constrain the kinds of work that can be done. Our Unification Ministry correspondent, Oh Jung-hee, has more.
The two Koreas will form a joint investigation team and get down to checking the status of North Korean and inter-Korean railroads next month. This as agreed at Tuesday's inter-Korean talks on connecting and modernizing railways between the two Koreas.
South and North Korea confirmed each other's stance that railway cooperation is greatly important to achieving a balanced economic development and common prosperity.
There are 2 railway lines the two Koreas are hoping to work on. The Gyeonggi line that links Seoul and North Korean city of Sinŭiju and the Donghae line along the eastern coast of the peninsula. From July 24th, Seoul and Pyongyang will start a joint investigation on parts of these rail lines in North Korea first. The two Koreas also hope to jointly check parts of the railways that cut through the inter-Korean border starting from mid-July.
We agreed to connect and modernize the Gyeonggi and Donghae lines at a high level and agreed to arrange practical measures for design and construction. We will also hold a groundbreaking ceremony soon in accordance with the results.
However, concerns remain on these railway projects as South Korean resources and equipment will have to go into North Korea for construction, which may violate international sanctions on North Korea. The South Korean delegation explained,
"There might be times when our work collides with international sanctions, but the government's stance is that we will work these out within the framework of sanctions and after close discussions with the international community."
The two Koreas agreed to communicate further through their contact channel to settle on the detailed schedules on preparations for the joint investigation next month. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
A funeral was held on this Wednesday for former South Korean Prime Minister Kim Jong-pil, who died last weekend. He was posthumously awarded the Mugunghwa Medal, the country's highest order of civil merit. And today, Kim's ashes were taken to his hometown of Buyeol in Chungcheongnam-do province, where they'll be placed in his family mausoleum. On the way, his funeral procession stopped by the schools he attended as a child. Kan Hyung-woo tells us more about a man who had been on the political scene since the 1960s.
The Kingmaker and the Eternal Number 2. Those were the phrases used by many South Koreans to describe former Prime Minister Kim Jong-pil, who died on Saturday at the age of 92. after an estimated 3,500 people from all walks of life and from across the political spectrum had come to pay their respects to Kim over the past few days. His send-off ceremony started early Wednesday morning with a eulogy by former Prime Minister Lee Han-dong. Former Japanese Prime Minister Yasuhiro Nakasone, an old friend of Kim, sent his son to the service to pay respects on his behalf. Kim's body was cremated and he will be laid to rest in his family tomb in Buyeo, Chungcheongnam-do Province. His late wife, Park Young-ok, who died in 2015, is also laid there. Kim Jong-pil was the founder of the Korean Central Intelligence Agency, now the National Intelligence Service, and served as prime minister from 1971 to 1975, and again from 1998 to 2000. He also served a record 9 terms as a lawmaker. He was the last of the so-called three Kims who were political heavyweights in the 1980s and 90s, together with former presidents Kim Dae-jung and Kim Young-sam. Kan-young-woo, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
The US motorcycle company Harley Davidson announced on Monday that it's moving production for some of its products outside of the United States to avoid EU tariffs. President Trump has slammed the decision, calling it a surrender. Noaram reports.
The EU imposed import duties of 25% on a range of American goods last week, including Harley Davidson motorcycles. That was in response to Washington's tariffs on European steel and aluminium, which President Trump said was designed to protect US jobs. But now it seems those measures have produced unintended consequences. Harley said Monday that the increased costs from the import taxes are threatening its international sales and could cost the firm up to $100 million a year. In order to offset the impact of retaliatory EU tariffs, Harley Davidson said it would be shifting some production overseas but didn't specify where. The shift in production is expected to take about 18 months. The Wisconsin-based company already has factories in Brazil and India and is opening one in Thailand while closing its Australian plant. The firm said that if it stayed in the US, then it would result in an incremental cost of about $2,200 per motorcycle sold in Europe. President Trump had previously thanked Harley Davidson for staying in America while criticizing other firms for moving production outside the US. But its trade disputes with other countries has even forced America's most iconic motorcycle manufacturer to look elsewhere. Later Monday, Trump tweeted that he was, quote, surprised by Harley's decision, describing it as waving the white flag. Europe is Harley's second biggest market outside the US and sold almost 40,000 motorcycles in Europe last year. Noaram, Arirang News.
Now joining us in the studio to discuss Harley Davidson's decision and other US trade issues, we have with us Professor Shin Sang-yup from Kyung University. Professor Shin, thank you for making the time to come in today.
Pleasure to be here today.
Now, motorcycle maker Harley Davidson, as we've just heard, has said it will move some of its production outside of the US because of the EU tariffs. Can you explain to our viewers how the EU tariffs would have affected Harley Davidson and why they made the decision that they did?
Yes, well, the Harley Davidson is a very famous motorcycle producers in the world. And then Mr. Trump decided to impose the 25% tariffs on the steel products imported from the European Union. And then in response to Mr. Trump's the decision, EU decided to impose the heavy tariffs on imported products from the United States, particularly icon products of the United States, such as the Harley Davidson. And according to the report, the EU is is going to impose 24 up to 31% tariffs on the the imported products such as Harley Davidson, and then the end user price of the Harley Davidson in European market could increase dramatically. According to the calculation, maybe per each motorcycle, the price could increase by $2,200. So, and if the price goes up, definitely market share of the Harley Davidson European market could dropped, reduced. So it can be a first burden on the our Harley Davidson. And another one is that, you know, these days to assemble a car, for example, they need about 22,000 components. And in case of the motorcycle, maybe they should have to use very many the components. And then among them, they should import some the products from overseas. Then USA adopted very protective import policy. This time they decide to impose 25% the tariffs on imported steel products, but there must be high possibility that USA could impose more, heavier the tariffs on other items of products. Then the intermediate products, the price imported from overseas could increase. Then definitely the end user price of those products used many components imported from foreign countries could go up. So these the reasons why Harley Davidson tried to move their production, the facilities from USA to other countries. Why? By moving their factory, they could avoid to be imposed the heavier tariffs imposed by the European Union. That means that if they produce the motorcycle inside the USA, that it can be the subject to heavy tariffs imposed by the European Union. But if they produce their products outside the USA, they could avoid the heavy tariffs imposed by the European Union. This is the reason why Harley Davidson announced their plan to move their factory from USA to other countries.
I mean, President Trump was on the defensive. He called Harley Davidson, they accused them of waving the white flag and surrendering.
Right.
But in a free market, isn't this what Harley Davidson is meant to do? As a company, if they can find somewhere to cut costs and save money, that they're going to go overseas rather than stay within the country. Does this show that Trump's plan is backfiring?
I think so, because the business is business. What I mean is the multinational corporations. I mean the corporations doing business activities in more than 2 countries. They always search for the ideal place for their production. That means they're seeking for the country or places where they can use the cheaper labor forces, or they want to start their business in the country where provided various incentives, such as financial and physical incentives. Those things are the factors considered by the investors, multinational corporations. In this context, right now, by the way, Mr. Trump has emphasized that USA companies should stay in the United States. But as I explained already, because of the reason why they do business inside the USA, they should take some additional financial burdens, which I explained already. So on the part of the companies in the United States, certainly it is one of the reasons why they try to move their production factors from USA to other countries. We can see one case already. Some American company used many components imported from overseas. He is using many imported steel products. So because of the heavy tariffs imposed by the Trump administration on imported steel products, the price of the products produced by the American company increased. So the sales volume of those products inside the USA market reduced dramatically. So the company decided to fire about 60 employees. This can be a kind of some side effects, unexpected side effects of Mr. Trump's very protective import policy.
You can't expect a company to be patriotic and care more about being patriots than being thinking about their bottom line.
Right.
But Trump has mentioned, though, that actually it could backfire on Harley Davidson as well, and that its customers might be angry at Harley Davidson and not buy its products as well. Do you see some sort of backlash potentially within the US?
I think so. The people should pay more money to buy same products. People will be very sad, and they will start to criticize the government. And as I already explained, because the...
do you think there might be impact on Harley Davidson, the company?
I see, sorry.
Going abroad.
As I already explained, the Harley Davidson, the price of the Harley Davidson in the European market will increase. And as I already explained, their market share in the European market will be reduced. So this can be a direct financial burden on the Harley Davidson. And then if they move their production factories from USA to other countries, they should have to make a huge initial investment to build a new factory. And then it will take a time to build the factories, normally maybe more than 1 year and then several years. During this time, their sales will be indirectly or directly affected because of those kind of plan. And thirdly, the heavy tariffs imposed by the European Union, definitely the Harley Davidson will have a direct effect in the sales activities. Particularly, I want to concern about the current financial situation of the Harley Davidson. According to the financial report released by the Harley Davidson last year, 2017, domestic sales volume of the Harley Davidson decreased by 8.5%. In international market, also their market share fell about just less than about 4%. So the financial situation facing the Harley Davidson is not very good, though. And then in such a kind of situation, because of the very protectionistic policy taken by Mr. Trump, if they should take the additional financial burden, it can be very serious problems for them, I think.
This all came from the fact that the US imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium on the EU, sorry. And there are also more tariffs that are expected to be placed on China, and both the EU and China are expected to make their own retaliatory measures.
Right.
Professor, are we now at a trade war? Has the trade war started?
Well, I cannot say no. Actually, trade war seems to start. But I think we have a very, very, tragic experiences of trade, the conflict before the outbreak of World War II. Because we got the lesson from the World War II, every countries, including USA, they decide to establish 3 international economic organizations, IMF, IBRD, and the GATT. Particularly GATT is dealing with the global trade issues, What is the main function of the GATT right now, WTO? That is to promote free trade. Certainly, what is happening right now, it is against such a kind of wish or the hope of the all countries, right? And then USA, Mr. Trump started the problem, and then the European Union and China, those are the very big economies as well. They retaliated to the American decision. So there have been some escalation in the trade, the trade policies between European Union and USA, between China and the USA. So certainly we can say that they are right now entering at the gate of the trade war, but I wish they should stop. Particularly USA should stop. Otherwise, that it can be the beginning of the round of the very tragic situation. So I wish personally, or every countries right now ask Mr. Trump to stop changes this policy. But Mr. Trump has emphasized that he's a freedom fighter for free trade and fair trade. But we have to concern about definition of fair trade. Americans empathize that the fair trade based on their perception, not by the other country's perception. I think we have discussed about this issue more actively. And then, as we know very well, European Union and China brought the case. Imposed tariffs on the imported products. China and European steel products to the DSP, the WTO. And then right now, the investigation is going on, and we have to wait the outcomes of investigation. But I think that before finalizing, to see the outcomes of the investigation, USA should have to change their policy. I think that should be the beginning of solving this problem, I think.
Briefly, before we go, we're here in South Korea. The US and China are South Korea's biggest trade partners.
Right.
And any kind of trade war between the US and China will affect the whole world, but especially, I think, South Korea as well. What does South Korea, what effects have South Korea seen already? And what do they need to watch out for?
Well, we have really some damages, problems because of the trade war, between 2 countries. Very recently, the Korean steel producer, largest steel producer like a POSCO, and Hyundai are still the complex. They had a problem in exporting their steel products to USA market. Well, on the part of USA, they have been criticized. They just targeted the Chinese steel producers. But the USA government emphasized that, no, this is not the decision only targeting the Chinese, the steel the industry. We are right now dealing with the oil countries on an equal basis. To justify their explanation, Korea was included. Somebody said Korea was included on the country which has been under the influence of the USA very protective import policy. So we, steel producers, Korean producers were reported to on the list of those countries on which the USA will impose 25% tariffs. But fortunately for us, that Korea was not on the list. But the USA adopted a new system. That means that from 2015 and 2017, they calculated total export volume of the Korean steel products. And they said that out of them, then 70% the products was given as a quota for the Korean producers. And the problem is that about the even quota which was given on the Korean steel producers, they do not clearly announce how much percentages tariffs they're going to impose on. But according to the report, it could be about 60%. So in case of the POSCO, and they stopped, they returned their license of exports of steel products to USA government. So what I mean is that indirectly or directly, we cannot deny that we are under very strong bad influences from the trade war between China and USA.
Thank you for your time, Professor, and thank you for sharing your insights and expertise today.
Well, thank you very much.
That concludes our show for today. Thank you for watching, and do stay tuned to Arirang for our later newscasts for more updates and analysis of the day's top stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Literally speaking, the essence of love in a short poem. Grass flower, pretty